Long time no see. Hey guys, welcome back to the tennis vlog. Not under the circumstances I was anticipating. I was going to do a video a week ago, exactly, reflecting on the tennis action between now and the Australian Open, and kind of looking ahead to the big 2, 3, 4 weeks or so with Indian Wells and the Miami Open. Didn't happen, and I'm pretty sure if you're watching now, you know why. Obviously, the coronavirus has wreaked havoc, and now tennis is off for a good long while. And actually, just recently, the ATP and WTA released a joint statement saying that the suspension is going on for longer than previously announced, which is no surprise, but it is the latest news. So this came out within the last hour. So we'll get going with a quick recap of the havoc and chaos of the past week or so, starting from the beginning, and then we'll get to talking about the current situation, what the future might hold, what things are looking at now, and paying particular attention to the moves made yesterday, or the big move made yesterday by the French Open, in which they switched the staging of Roland Garros from May, June time to the back end of September, which has drawn mixed reactions, to say the least. So thank you if you're here live. I will be interacting with you and I'll be reading out your opinions and any questions you have. Let's keep the questions to things that have happened over the past week and looking ahead to the future. I think that with all the time we're going to be spent sat inside, I'll probably do more videos over the coming weeks. So we'll potentially look back at the tennis that's been played already this season, etc. But let's keep questions and discussion today purely to what's been going on over the past few days. And yeah, let me know your thoughts on anything I say, your observations on anything that's happened over the past few days. Let me know some things I might have missed. Obviously, there's a lot of news coming out very quickly now. And we're just going to break it down and have a look at the reaction and our own opinions on things that are taking place at the moment. So things started going haywire about a week ago, so Sunday night, Monday morning for me last week, when Indian Wells was cancelled on the basis of one local case of the coronavirus. Now that was a shock because everyone knew about the virus, obviously, but this, in the whole world of sport, it was really Indian Wells that was the first big event to go. I did a Twitter thread actually on my opinions on this particular situation, which is kind of irrelevant now, but I basically said that the initial reaction was shock, but I could understand why they'd done it. It was not about the severity of the virus, it was about preventing the virus from spreading. As we know, for most people, particularly people of my age, this virus is not going to be deadly, it's not going to be anything too troublesome, but obviously it takes working together as a team to protect the people that are vulnerable to this, and teamwork is something that the French Open apparently forgot about yesterday, but we'll get to that in a moment. So Indian Wells, I thought at the time, because things hadn't gone as far as they have now, I did think that there was the potential for Indian Wells to have found an alternative way to stage the events, but it really did set the tone for everything that followed. And in retrospect, they definitely did make the right call. There were several more cases in the area shortly after that announcement was made. And we've seen everything shutting down. And I think the lateness of the announcement from Indian Wells just kind of proved that they had gone through all their options. They had been looking at various options and different ways that they could potentially go ahead. And when they didn't find any, that was always going to have a massive impact, I think, on the tournaments that followed. Prior to Indian Wells, I didn't see anything getting cancelled in the near future. After Indian Wells, nothing has been surprising. So when the ATP, WTA, and ITF combined announced that the tennis on all of their tours was going to be off until end of April at the very earliest, that was not a shock. So that was about a week ago now. And now we've had this latest update, which says that there will be no tennis across ATP, WTA, and ATP Challenger level events until the beginning of June. So originally, the likes of the Monte Carlo Masters was struck off the list, but now Rome and Madrid, most specifically, premier events for the women, Masters 1000 events for the men, are no more. And this was anticipated because of the announcement made yesterday that the French Open, which these events were leading up to, had changed dates from the original time of May, June to the 20th of September to the 4th of October. And I do want to share my opinions on that particularly, just to say there had been a lot of consternation over what would happen rankings-wise, would the rankings be frozen, etc. Rankings have been frozen, so no one's going to be dropping off a load of points, which I think is the right decision, because that would have affected more players at the lower ends and players who'd performed well at this particular point of the season. We don't know when this is going to end and when things are going to come back. So at this point in time, I guess for the lower ranked players, rankings points is a particular worry. So I think it's a good move that they've been frozen in time. I see one of the first comments on the chat says, am I the only one pleased that the French Open has been moved to September? Well, we're about to find out because we're about to talk about it. So the French Open announced their move yesterday. It was a move made by the French Tennis Federation, and it quickly became apparent that the ATP, WTA, the players involved had not been consulted on this move. It was made in isolation by the French Open itself. And you know, the Grand Slams are powerful events. They have, I mean, they're owned by the ITF, but ultimately the people involved in organizing these have control over what happens. So they are within their rights to do what they want to do with their tournament. Should they have taken the opinions of people who are deeply involved in this event into consideration? My opinion is yes. Their opinion obviously is not. But yeah, so this is the situation with the French Open. It's been moved to a point in the calendar where the Asian swing would be kicking off, but more notably, it's been moved, and you're probably aware of this already, to 1 week after the US Open is finished. And with that being said, that's the main draw that would be kicking off 1 week after the US Open. Actually, as things stand, the qualifying event for the French Open would begin play the day after the US Open finishes, just to give you an idea of how close together those are. The French Open would now be played without any warm-up events on dirt leading into the event. You'd go straight from the hard courts of another continent, from another time zone, into play at the French Open. I mean, we can only hope that the weather would be good because it is autumn in France and we know what their spring summer was like last year. So thankfully they've got a roof now at the French, which could well be coming into use on Court Philippe Chatrier. But this is where I ask the question, what do you think of the move from the French Open? My initial feelings were very strong, as they generally are, so I do give myself a bit of time to digest and analyze the situation. I did sit down and I wrote a list of pros and cons to weigh up and see whether my strong feelings on this had any merit. I had one pro written down for this move from the French Open, and that was the financial situation. The big issue for players at the moment, particularly further down the rankings ladder, I'm thinking challenger level, ITF level, that kind of thing. The biggest worry for them at the moment is money. You know, they're not working, they're not earning. So how do they get by? You know, and this is a big tournament with a big draw, and because it's a Grand Slam, the prize money right from the get-go is higher than you would find it elsewhere. So on that basis, given that if this tournament actually does take place and if the US Open takes place, given that players won't have been competing for months probably and will have not had the opportunity to earn money, this is a good move because it gives them that opportunity to, even if they just win 1 or 2 rounds, even if they come through qualifying, get some much needed money. That's what it's about at the moment, living, getting by. So that was the one pro I had. I thought, okay, good. If the French Open moves and gives players, particularly further down the rankings, that money earning opportunity, and that's a good thing. But the list of cons for me was quite longer. The close proximity to the US Open was a big no-no for me straight away, just because of so many different things. And I know that Wimbledon used to be played about a week after the French Open many years back, but the game was a lot less physical then. The hop across from Paris to London is nothing compared to the switch between New York and Paris. Um, the surfaces, you could say that was a big difference, but I think in this day and age, with the way the game is, it's going to be a lot harder to go from fast, intense hard courts in New York to the high bouncing clay of Roland Garros. In my opinion, I think, especially given that there are a select few clay quarters on tour and probably a majority that prefer to play on a faster surface, that's a big ask of the players further into the season as well. So I think the distance between the US Open and the French Open was the big kind of alarm bell for me at first, but then it took no consideration. It didn't take any other events into consideration, the French Open, with this move, which is where, you know, you look at the tennis calendar and it's so jam-packed from start to finish. ATP Cup hardly found a place in the calendar. The Davis Cup finals now protrude into the off season. So people are, you know, picking up the weeks however they can. And all these tournaments are squeezed into the schedule. Players are forever complaining about how short the off season is. And I doubt that'll happen this year because off season take two. But I think it's just selfishness really from the French Open, from my perspective, because you've got at ATP and WTA level alone, I think you've got 10 or 11, I think it was 11 events played in this same fortnight as the French Open is now scheduled for. That includes 2 premier events, I believe, on the WTA side. On the ATP side, there's nothing higher than a 500, but still, these are tournaments that have worked hard, that have staff to pay, that have broadcast rights, that have their spot in the calendar. This is the Asian swing. This is the hard court season. And a clay court major has just come and dumped itself on top of them because it can. Because its space in the calendar was being overtaken by everything that's going on. So the audacity to think they could just up and move to wherever they wanted to. This is why people have to work together, because otherwise the tour is not going to function. Players aren't going to be happy, staff aren't going to be happy, media aren't going to be happy. No one is going to be satisfied if people don't come to joint decisions, which is why the US Open threw a bit of shades at the French Open with its statement yesterday saying that any decision would be made in full consultation with the ATP, WTA, ITF, etc. So yeah, that was a big thing for me when I saw the move by the French Open. The kind of this, who else used this word? I think, was it Vasek Pospisil, who's on the ATP Council? The selfishness of the slam, because another thing for me is that things are moving bit by bit, and even though these cancellations and suspensions are coming drip, 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 you kind of, when you look at the worldwide situation at the moment, you get a sense that they are coming. It's anticipated, you know what's around the corner. And the more things go on and the more cancellations that are happening outside of the sport as well. Glastonbury was cancelled. The Glastonbury Festival was cancelled earlier. Now that's end of June, and that's the week before Wimbledon. So these other cancellations outside of sport do have implications for tennis itself and indicate the possibility that things might happen that we don't want to see happening. And in my opinion, over the past few days, it's not just been the French Open that's been under threat, it's been Wimbledon. Now, if you look at the calendar, and wherever you look, wherever you try to move, and just to say, I am looking at the comments coming in on the chat, so send them coming and I will get to your questions. If you look at the calendar, there is only, you're going to be treading on toes, okay, wherever you go, there is going to be someone that's disappointed. But there is one place where if a slam was very, very desperate, which the French Open clearly was, there is one place where you can potentially slot yourself in, and that is the 2 weeks the French Open has taken, because there are 11 Masters 1000 events. There would be uproar, I think, if a slam knocked one of the Masters 1000 events to the side. On the WTA, there are several layers of Premier events, so Premier Mandatory, and then Premier 5, Premier. There seem to be Premier events all over the shop. So it's less of a deal for a slam to land on top of a Premier event or two than for it to land on top of a Masters 1000 event. So there's going to be less uproar there. It's kind of easier to smooth over, I guess. So really, what the French Open has done is tried to get in there quickly before someone else takes this space, because what if Wimbledon can't be played, which is honestly, as much as I honestly hate to say it, it's looking more of a possibility with each day that passes that the Wimbledon is very much under threat. Where does Wimbledon go? So, and I'm sure the French Open will have been aware of this, so they've made the decision ahead of time before something can happen to Wimbledon, and Wimbledon look at their options. They get in there first so that they get played. But then what about Wimbledon? What's even the point of having 2 French Opens in the space of 8 months if there's one Wimbledon in 2 years? Or, my maths is bad, but I think that's what it would be. To me, it is pure selfishness on the French Open's part, because I mean, even if you look at Wimbledon and the US Open, yes, there's the time zone difference, but there's less of a difference between hard courts and grass courts in general. I mean, everything has a different pace, but there's, in my opinion, from my observation, generally there's less of a difference between a hard court and a grass court than a grass court, not a grass court, sorry, a hard court and a clay court. The Williams sisters used to only practice, I'm not sure if they still do, but they used to only practice on hard courts ahead of the grass and playing at Wimbledon. So that shows you that there is less of a hop across. So obviously that would have been an ideal opening for Wimbledon if they really felt the burning need to play Wimbledon this year, however, whatever the cost to anyone else. And I mean, it just looks like almost a panicky move from the French Open. And I mean, to address the situation in general with the whole coronavirus and people melting down and the media coverage, etc., there's a difference between not taking it seriously and not panicking. People need to be responding, but responding calmly. And nothing good has ever come from people panicking. And this, to me, from the French Open, it looks like a panic move to get in there quickly so that, 2020 doesn't go to waste. But that's my opinion. So please be sending your opinions on. Give me something to come back at. Someone said earlier, am I the only one glad that the French Open has been moved to September? Give me your reasons. Why are you glad? Let me know. Because I have seen some decent arguments about, I saw on Twitter earlier people saying, in the grand scheme of things, weeks of no tennis, months of no tennis, people are just going to be glad to have another event in the calendar, to have the opportunity, on the players' part, to have the opportunity to earn money, on the fans and spectators' part, to have the opportunity to watch another event. And I understand that. That's a fair point. When it comes to it, will people mind so much? I feel like with a Grand Slam, the effort and the time that's put into them, they will find a way to make this work. If they really want to stick by their guns and play the French Open at the end of September, and honestly, I would rather they just cancel the thing and wait to next year, because 8 months between slams, it's not a great thing anyway. If they want to do it, they will find a way of doing it, but it downgrades it for me. These are the 4 biggest events in tennis, and I think if you can't play them to optimum standards, then don't play them at all, because you don't want to mess with the prestige of these events. Whoever wins the French Open on the men's side and the women's side, it will go down in the history books as Grand Slam win, French Open win. There won't be any side notes as to who was present and who wasn't. There won't be any side notes as to how and where the tournament was played. It will just be the French Open. And what with the close positioning with the US Open, Nadal is defending both the US Open and the French Open. Honestly, Nadal's not going to miss the French Open unless he's injured, but he's not going to like this. Obviously, one of the events does it count as ATP now? I don't know, but one of the events that the French Open does clash with is the Laver Cup. Now, I'm not in uproar over that as many people are. I know the Laver Cup is loved and accepted, etc. I think they've done a great job with it. I don't think it's the end of the world that it collides with something, but it was there first, so I think it has every right to stand its ground. And my point is, in mentioning that, Roger Federer would play Laver Cup over the French Open, because however good he is and however phenomenal I think he was on clay courts last year, I really do think that Federer, you know, swinging freely, produced some brilliant tennis on clay last year. He knows that his best shots at another slam are on the faster surfaces, so it's not going to cause him any sleepless nights, I don't think, over the fact that he wouldn't play the French. So I think that's Federer down straight away. The likes of Nick Kyrgios live for the team events, Laver Cup, etc. So that would be him out. It's being staged in Boston, America. So, you know, clay courts haven't always been kind to Americans. So I would presume a fair few of them would play the Laver Cup instead. So it just does take the prestige surrounding the tournaments down a bit, and maybe that's just kind of emotions on my part, but I think that it makes things unnecessarily messy, in my opinion. Come back if you disagree, let me know why you disagree, and if you agree, let me know why you agree. But that's my standing on it. Yeah, it's just been everything that's been a mess over the past week or so has not needed to be a mess. It could have been avoided with good communication. And these communication skills have been something that has been missing over the past few days. And I'm glad to see the joint statement from the ATP and the WTA on the shutting down of the seasons for a little longer, because that element of working together is what's necessary for everyone involved. So it's good to see that happening. Yeah, I just think with this, I think the players' opinions need to be taken into consideration a bit more, because more and more it feels like the players are kind of getting disregarded. And I'm not just talking at the bottom level, things are pretty bad at ITF level at the moment. I'm talking about further up the ladder as well. It kind of feels to me like because they're getting paid X amount of money and because they're living this well, they should just be grateful to have the opportunity to play, and they should get on with it. They're almost not allowed to complain, or any reservations they do have are not taken into consideration by tournaments X, Y, and Z when they're making decisions. And in my opinion, this is wrong. There is no tennis and there are no events without the players. Their opinions should be the first opinions that are gone to when big decisions like this are being made, and that's just not happening at the moment, and that does not sit well with me, and I'm sure it doesn't sit well with them. I mean, more and more when big decisions are made in tennis, when discussions are being had about should it be best of 5 sets or should it be best of 3 sets, etc., people are talking about the fans and the people watching at home and this person and that person, but rarely the players who are actually out there providing the entertainment in the first place, the players for whom this is their job and their livelihoods. And don't get me wrong, the fans are of utmost importance. A lot of the revenue and the money actually comes from them, and therefore their needs and their desires are important as well, but no players, no sport. So I do think that the players are starting to get disregarded a bit. And if there was any time for this to be addressed and for people to step up and make a difference on that level, it's now, because over the past few days, there have been several examples of the players not having been consulted, not having been communicated with, and not having been listened to, and that should not be the case. So let's have a look at some of your comments so far. Thank you to everyone that's tuning in live. Oh, dearie me, just dropped something. Let's see. Oh, people watching from worldwide. I hope that you're all doing well in self-isolation or lockdown or wherever you happen to be. Look, I'm not a medical expert here, and I think the thing in this situation is if you don't know any better, do what you're told and do it calmly. That's what I'm doing. I'm not a medical expert, and I'm just staying at home until I'm told otherwise. So wait it out, and I'm sure it will pass eventually. Okay, so someone says, do I think the French Open changing the date to late September was the right move? And I think I've made it pretty clear that I don't think personally that it was the right move. I can look at it from both sides and I can see, I was going to say I can see pros and cons, but I didn't see many pros for it, to be honest. That, I can look at it from different people's perspectives. And I think that's what should have been done when the French Open were making this decision. Instead of making a hasty jump into things, they should have looked at it from the angles of fans, from the angles of players. They should have talked to the relevant people. And it just doesn't appear like. Are we live again? Sorry, we buffered for a moment, but I'm going to presume that all is well and hope that all is well. We're still going. Lovely. Okay, what was I saying? Yeah, the case with Indian Wells and the case with this latest announcement from the French Open was that players were finding out about what was going on via Twitter, via the internet, and that shouldn't be the case. I think communications between players, tournaments with players need to step up because this is unacceptable. Drop me a message and let me know if this is playing for you guys, because it dropped momentarily, and on my stream here, it's not actually started up again, which is a little bit concerning. Okay, people are saying it's live. Thank you guys. Okay, apparently it's working. I'm just gonna have to hope that no internet. Okay, the internet where I am is traditionally dreadful, and apparently it dropped momentarily. But I'm gonna continue and hope all is for the best. Okay, okay, I'm just loading this again. Yeah, so I think that, the French Open are going to do what the French Open want to do, but they should have made every possible, they should have explored every avenue before they made this move. It's a big move. It affects a lot of people. And it's just, to me, it just doesn't look like they went in as in-depth as they could have done. And we are back live properly, thankfully. Thank you very much. I do these live streams in fear, the amount of them that have dropped. Where are we at? I've now lost my place. Okay, so someone did ask, will Federer play Roland Garros or the Laver Cup? Federer made the Laver Cup. He's done all the promotion. He's got people on board. He's made it. He's taken it from a glorified exhibition to quite a respectable event. The ATP are on board with it now. So I don't see Federer, who's just had a brilliantly timed surgery, I don't see him dropping that to go and play a Grand Slam that he knows he's not the lead contender for, even though, as I say, he played some of the best clay court tennis we saw last year. So yes, if the French Open are to stick to their guns and play the tournament in September, I don't think we'll be seeing Federer there. Although Federer should be healed and back to normal in time for the tours starting up again. So round of applause for the Fed, because man, was he on point there. Yeah, someone rightly points out Nadal defending 4,000 points in 1 month. When you put it like that, that shows just how big of a deal it is. And you never quite know what Nadal is going to say or do, but when he is displeased with something, he does make it known. I'm not sure if he will be so forthright here, because really, there's probably not a lot that he can do about the decision that's been made. But Nadal, we've watched him for years, with his little rituals and the way he lines his bottles up at the side of the court. Everything has to be in exactly the right place for him to produce his optimum level. He has to go through these routines. Everything has to be the same. And so this is going to be a massive shakeup for him, and it probably will open up the French Open for other players such as Dominic Thiem, Novak Djokovic, who undoubtedly has his eye on all 4 major trophies this year. Because, if Nadal makes a deep run at the US Open and on form gone by, there's nothing to say that he wouldn't. That is a quick turnaround for him. And the thing that we've seen with Nadal in recent years is that he usually has a bad loss or two on clay prior to Roland Garros. So he does really well at getting that out of his system when it's not important or not as important, and producing when it matters. With the French Open this year, if things stay as they are, and there's still a part of me that really hopes this whole idea is just scrapped, I would rather see this tournament cancelled than it not produced to the best of its ability. If things go ahead as planned, that could be a problem for Nadal, because I mean, he is experienced, he is still the king of clay, and he could still produce, but it's a lot to ask of him in a short space of time. And he does not have that liberty of even taking a couple of days off between the US Open and the French Open. And this is where I think it's more of a big deal for the men than the women, because the WTA Tour is wide open anyway. There are more regular lead contenders now, but really, if we're being honest, we don't have a clue who's going to win each of the Grand Slams. So this year's French Open being a little bit different and being more open and being unpredictable, that doesn't change much on the women's side. For the men, they're playing best of 5 as well, so it's more taxing physically. And then they've not got any time really to regroup and recover, because they've got to go straight over and start practicing on clay in order to be comfortable on the surface to get going in a major event. So I just think the timing of this is just pretty appalling, in my opinion. And yeah, I'm seeing several agreements that other people who think they should cancel it this year, because again, if Wimbledon gets cancelled, Wimbledon's not being staged this year, because I do not see where it could be played. You cannot play it in the winter in the UK, believe you me. No, it would be rain after rain after rain, and we've got 2 roofs, yes, but that's not enough, I don't think. You'd have to play the tournament over a month, and there's not a month free unless you're going to take up the whole of the off-season, so... Oh, which brings me to the next question here. Do you think Wimbledon will be able to occur on the scheduled date? I really hope so. I really do hope so. But the issue here is, okay, so I'm in England, okay? The situation here is that things are supposed to peak in about a couple of weeks. And when something's peaked, obviously it reaches the top and you expect it to go down the other side. So hopefully, by the time June rolls around and the grass court season in general, hopefully things will be more manageable. Hopefully the number of cases will have gone down. Hopefully we won't all be confined to our homes, although I'm very grateful for the home I'm confined to at the moment. But the issue is, with tennis events, you've got people, fans and players and staff even, flying over from all parts of the world. And whatever England and the UK's situation is in 2 months or so, is it really that near? It must be 2 or 3 months, okay? Whatever our situation is, it's not going to be the same all the way across the world. So are airlines going to be operating as they should? Is it going to be safe to bring people in from all corners and stage this tournament, or is it going to start another spread of this thing? So honestly, there's a lot to combat, and it's very tight. And as much as I want to be confident, I'm not too positive about it at the moment, which is a killer, because I love the grass court season. That's generally most of the time when I get to work at tournaments. Some of my usual jobs have been affected already, but I did have stuff. I freelance, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, in tennis media, particularly commentating, and I did have stuff lined up for the grass court season, which I know is very much under threat. So, my heart says, yes, it can happen, and my head's more saying it's very unlikely. I think at this point in time, unless we see a drastic improvement in the next few weeks, I think Wimbledon's definitely in a sticky situation, and that made me even more annoyed with the French Open yesterday when I saw that they'd made that move without any consultation, because to me, the thing is, what's the point in playing the French Open when Wimbledon can't be played anyway? It's not like all 4 Grand Slams are going to be able to happen at the moment, so I don't see the point in rescheduling one and not the other, if you can see things from that perspective. Yeah, so same person says they should have waited until closer to the tournament time. This is the French Open, I think. We're still 2 months away. A lot could happen between now and then. This is true. I think France is in a worse situation than the UK. So they do have to take that into consideration. I mean, I'm no expert here, but they have to look at how this virus in certain cases has progressed in other countries, China, US, etc. And there is guesswork involved because if you don't act quickly, then things are upon you before you can deal with them. So there is forward thinking involved and you do have to forward plan, but could they have afforded to give it a bit more time? I think so, because at the moment, no one's planning to travel to the French Open anyway, because expectations are low. At the moment, people are just thinking about how they're going to get enough toilet roll from the supermarket or food even. And please don't be one of those people that takes more than you need, because remember, for the vast majority of people, this thing is not going to be serious. And the whole point of what we're doing now is to help the people for whom it would be. So keep that in mind, please. Someone says, why can't they just cancel it for 1 year? Would they lose too much money? I don't think any of the Grand Slams have to worry financially. I mean, if you look at Indian Wells, which is the kind of the next level down from the Slams, they were fine with closing up for a year. So obviously they would lose money, but I don't think they would lose too much money. I think this is just a case of pride and wanting and needing the event to be played and not being willing to forego a year. I mean, if you look back at the World Wars, this is not, I mean, this kind of situation with the virus is unprecedented, but no tennis was played during, I think, the Second World War. I think everything was cancelled. So it's not like this hasn't happened before. Tournaments, the biggest tournaments in the sport, have been shut and not played over a year or two. It's happened. So I don't know why it's any different now. And I just think, for me personally, for all the reasons that I've mentioned, I think the wisest thing would have been for the French Open to just let it go for a year. And it's not something that people want to see. But once again, I do think, you know, players' opinion should be taken into consideration. A lot of the first reactions to the news were shock. We saw that from the likes of Naomi Osaka, who's right at the top, and displeasure. Vasek Pospisil was very forthright with what he said. But then in more recent times, aka earlier today, I saw Andrei Rublev, who's had great form so far this year, saying that you know, a lot of players would rather it was played than not played at all, and they would rather have that opportunity to get prize money, because for the players it's not just about for the glory, it's their job, it's about, you know, keeping themselves alive as well. So I do think, you know, once we've got more opinions from the players, it will be clearer about, you know, how many of them, what kind of majority or minority are happy with this going forwards. Because from the initial responses, it did seem like most of the players were shocked and kind of outraged by this decision. But, you know, people with a negative opinion are always quicker to speak. Could probably vouch for that myself as well, not going to lie. So, you know, sometimes you do have to wait it out a bit and see what everyone else is thinking. But no, I'm playing devil's advocate here, aren't I? I just don't think it's a good idea. I've looked at it from all angles, and I think the bad far outweighs the goods on this occasion. Oh, thanks for sending more in. Let's get through this. Has anything like this ever happened before in tennis and sports? So, across sport in general, I mean, you'd have to go back to the World Wars, because, I mean, deeply, deeply serious time, more serious than this. Things were shut down. Not in my lifetime. I've not seen anything like this. You know, one day, one tennis tournament shutting down as a shock, and the next day, tournaments, football, rugby, tennis, shutting down quickly, dropping like flies. It's suddenly not shocking anymore, but it's happening. Something like this, I think, has never, all of this happening because of a virus that's only kind of really dangerous to a percentage of society. I don't think this has happened before. And I don't mean that to sound derogatory or kind of playing down the seriousness of this. I'm just stating a fact, you know, that a lot of people are not actually in danger of death by this virus. But as I said before, it's a group effort to contain it and to protect those that are vulnerable, because there are people that are vulnerable and their fear is, you know, valid and, you know, understandable. Are all clay court masters events effectively cancelled too? The French Open kind of forced their hand by this announcement. Yes, so the announcement from the ATP and WTA about an hour prior to this live stream basically confirmed the shutdown of the clay court season. But still, we're playing a clay court major. Oh my word. We're playing a clay court major in the middle of the Asian swing. The joy, the joy. It's just more ridiculous the more I think about it. But, you know, when it comes to it and they actually manage to stage it, they'll find a way. They'll find a way of doing it, but it just there will be unhappy people. There will be unhappy people. Okay, how about the points deducted on Indian Wells? Will it be re-established again? How about those players who announced withdrawing ahead of Indian Wells? Oh, good question. Well, basically, no one earned any points for Indian Wells this year, and no one played at Indian Wells this year, so rankings are frozen, no ranking points dropped, so everything that's happened, or everything that hasn't happened since the last week of tournaments, which was like WTA Lyon, WTA Monterrey, everything from Indian Wells onwards does not affect the players. The ranking points stay on, the rankings are frozen, so they don't need to worry about things in that regard. The biggest frustrations for players at the moment is no prize money coming in and not knowing what to aim for. When do they start training again? What are they training for? What's the comeback date? I think that, you know, tournaments have to consider the fact that however talented these players are, they can't just be given a couple of days notice, pick up their rackets, get to a country and start playing again. You know, they need time to warm their bodies into it and to prepare so that injuries don't happen, so that they are ready to give of their best, etc. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting few weeks, that's for sure. Okay, good question here. How about the aging stars pursuing / extending records? Next year they'll be a year older, so perhaps it wouldn't be fair to them to cancel and take away some of their chances. What's the nicest way of saying this? I highly doubt that the desires of the top players are first and foremost with these decisions and moves that have been made. So, you know, tournaments, they need to operate to get the revenue and to keep things moving and to put a tick in a box. I don't think that will have been at the front of their minds when they were scheduling this, particularly because Rafael Nadal is beloved at the French Open, and this does not work well for him in his schedule. And if you look at it, it's going to be the likes of Nadal, Djokovic, Federer that are going deep in New York. And if that is the case, if they all decide to play the US Open, which, I mean, who would skip a Grand Slam at that level when you're a front runner? If they do decide to play the US Open, the likelihood is that they go deep, and then they've played these 2 weeks of best of 5-set tennis, and they quickly have to hot foot it over, get on a clay court, hit for a bit, and then play another major on the clay. That, I mean, for me, I think that the top players are most adversely affected by this move, because, as I've said, for the lower ranked players, it's an opportunity for prize money. It's an opportunity for a good run at a Grand Slam. It's inevitably going to be a bit more open. But for the top players, you know, they've just had, hopefully for them, they've just had the American clay court swing. No, my mind's all over the place now. The American hard court swing. And then they've just had the US Open. Probably most of them will have gone deep there. So it just doesn't work out for them. So for those reasons, I think, yeah, for those reasons, I do not think the top players were at the forefront of the minds of the French Tennis Federation when they made this move. Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, I'm not really going to talk too much about the virus as a whole, because it's not my field of expertise. But I did say the other day, I said if people with the whole hoarding of food, toilet paper, etc. I said, if people do this now with a virus, what if something, you know, worse happens down the line? How are people going to respond? I mean, people, you know, it is a serious situation, but people need to take a deep breath and just calmly respond in the ways they need to respond and think of the people that need to be cared for and protected here. If all Grand Slams are cancelled this year, it will be a massive blow to Djokovic's bid to catch Federer and Nadal's Grand Slam record. I'm not so sure, to be honest with you, because 2020 was a big year for Federer and Nadal. You've got to remember these two are older than Djokovic. Nadal only by a year, but Federer by several years. So, you know, Djokovic in recent times, I think, has done better at peaking for the Grand Slams. We saw in 2011 and in 2015 his insane dominance over the whole season. But I think in recent times he's kind of been stockpiling his energy for the slams, so he has had the occasional shocking or surprising loss outside of the slams, and less time on the court this year might actually give him replenished energy and get him going for the next season. That said, Djokovic has had a stunning start to the year, and he won Dubai most recently before things got axed and was looking very, very good. So I don't think it'll affect Djokovic too much either way, these cancellations, but I think it probably affects Federer and Nadal more because they're not going to be around as long. I mean, Nadal maybe, but he's had more injury difficulties than Djokovic. Federer is older, so he won't be around as long. So, someone says, I hate to see all the players' momentum shattered. I think both tours will be wide open when they return and new stars could emerge. Yeah, I feel this, and I was thinking about this earlier, actually. Not so much thinking of the top players, you know, Djokovic is a machine when he wants to be, and he can pretty much just pick up where he left off. But if you look at some of the younger players, Andrei Rublev was in stunning form on the ATP, won 2 titles, or at least reached 2 finals going into the Australian Open. He'd capitalised on a good run at the end of last season. On the WTA side, Elena Rybakina reached 2 finals ahead of the Australian Open. She just reached the Dubai final ahead of everything being cancelled. So there are 2 players there that could have that momentum that they've worked so hard on building up completely stalled when they come back. So it is disappointing for them. It's a disappointing situation. But look, it's a teamwork thing again. In order to contain this virus and to stop it spreading further and to get rid of it as quickly as possible, it's become more apparent with every passing day that these moves that have been made were necessary and are necessary. And I think mostly players across the board, I have not seen a single negative response, I don't think. I think players have done very well at being understanding and taking this in their stride. And players that aren't so happy with the moves have done well at keeping quiet. And I think it's completely understandable for them to be frustrated, for them to feel annoyed, for them to feel it's unfair. Life is unfair. I think that's, you know, these are totally legitimate emotions to have, but I gotta say round of applause to the players because in general, I think they've acted very professionally. And, you know, those that have had those strong opinions that might have riled some people up have kept them under wraps. So fair play, except they haven't been playing. If Wimbledon was to go as planned, Federer would still be a top 4 seed due to the rankings freeze. Yeah, Federer's probably got his feet up right now, has a smile on his face, and his family around him, and life is very, very good. Yeah, I think, you know, clearly he couldn't see into the future, but it looks like he could. Okay, when do you think the season will restart? I think it could be easy for... Okay, the question here is, when do you think the season will restart? Or do you think it will? This is the question I thought would come at some point. And the real answer is I don't know, because it's not just about the situation in any given country. Every tournament, wherever it's played, has to take into consideration that they have players and staff, etc., and fans flying from all corners of the world. So the worldwide situation has to be taken into consideration because, like I said, the timescale for this thing progressing and peaking and declining in the UK, you know, potentially the grass court season could go ahead. But the question is, how does it go ahead? Because while things are improving in this country, they might still be deteriorating, or I don't know, still be in a bad way elsewhere. And you do have to think about players coming in and people traveling and that kind of thing. So it's an impossible question to answer. There's too much that's still unknown. You know, this has been one of the craziest weeks because I mean, it's been such a long week, and yet things have been so fast paced. You know, there's been more new information, more cancellations, more progression of the virus every single day, and nothing's predictable at the moment. So it's a hard question. It's one I wish I could answer, and it's one, unfortunately, that I can't. If it's me looking at it, you know, I just hope that they can get the grass court season going, you know. But at the end of the day, we can talk all night and day about the US Open and the French Open and how I think they're scheduled too close together and how I don't like the French Open to move. But, you know, we could still not be back on by then. It really does depend on how things go over these next few weeks and months. We might not even be back for the US Open and the French Open. And that will be all problems solved as far as that schedule goes. But yeah, I think these next few weeks will probably tell a lot, but at the moment that is a sadly unanswerable question. Oh, I've lost where I am. Here we go. What about Daniel Medvedev and defending points in the American swing and then defending points at Shanghai if it was to play? Again, you know, we don't know. We don't know if we'll be back by then. And for Medvedev, though, this might be kind of a sweet relief for him because he didn't have the best start to this season after having an insane end to last season. He didn't quite carry on where he left off last year. So, you know, for some players, the likes of Rublev and Rybakina, this isn't great. But for other players like Medvedev, this gives him a bit of time to sit down, take a deep breath, assess the situation, and, you know, just try and get his head together. So for some people, it's, you know, you've got to take the situation. There's no changing what's happening, okay? And this is the same for everyone, for anyone watching, for me, for players across the world. Whatever your job is or whatever situation you're in, there is no, well, I mean, we're pretty much all in the same situation, but, you know, there's no changing what's happening. You can't change what's happening, but you can affect how you deal with it and how you use this time and, yeah, how you put this time to use. So I think for all the players, it's going to be more difficult for some than others, you know, depending on where they are. The Italians, for example, probably aren't going to be able to get out and practice. It will be different paces for different people. And, you know, that has to be taken into consideration as well by tournaments that are making moves. So yeah, people just have to be thinking about, you know, how they use this time. You know, the situation is what it is. Generally all in lockdown or self-isolation, but, you know, we're still living and we still have time and it can still be used. So I decided to use my time this evening to sit down and do a live stream. So thank you to everyone that's tuned in. I think I'm going to wrap this up now. Did I have anything else to say? I feel like I had a jolly odd little chat about my displeasure with the French Open. Yeah, I think you got the general idea that I'm largely displeased with it, but then at the end of the day, it might not be played anyway, so they could be wasted emotions on my part. Yeah, I mean, I just feel for all the other tournaments that just haven't been taken into consideration because of their status. You know, the idea that a major can just land on top of another load of tournaments that, you know, are of prestige. You know, you've got 250s, 500s, premier events that are just being swept to the sidelines. I don't like that. But it is what it is, you know, things have happened and we've got to take this thing 1 week, one step at a time. So thank you for watching. I reckon that I'll probably be back again over the next few weeks. I haven't quite worked out what we're doing yet because obviously there's no live tennis to talk about, but I did think about reflecting on the tennis that's been, because sorry, I only really did videos during the Australian Open, so there's actually a lot to talk about. So if you'd be interested in that, let me know. Also, let me know if you prefer the live streams or if you like me to pre-edit the videos. I know a lot of you appreciate these so that you can interact and I can answer your questions, but some do come and watch at a later date anyway. So let me know what you would prefer. Thank you for your time, and thank you for those of you that have tuned in start to finish. Your questions and your interaction has been much appreciated. I hope that it provided a bit of entertainment for anyone that's feeling particularly bored, and I'll try and make sure that next time is not too far away. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.